Throughout history, the children of the wealthy elites never had to serve on the front lines of any conflict. But in modern Russia, service in the military is essentially a requirement for national level office. So Russia has created a unit just for politicians' kids. What exactly is their role? Is this even a real military unit? And are they able to leave whenever they want while the conscripts have to stay until the bitter end? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's break down and look inside the VIP Brigade. Okay. This is a crazy story from the New York Times describing getting inside the so-called Kascad Brigade. Now, this is a brigade that ostensibly is a drone unit led by an active member of the Russian parliament. This has been called the VIP Brigade for ambitious Russian officials. Now, one of the things that is worth pointing out is that Vladimir Putin has explicitly militarized society and government. And in this way, he has had policies that say explicitly, we want veterans of this war to enter into public service as elected officials. And it's been explicit that his party, which he essentially personally controls, is the only way to advance within it is to have military service on your record. But here's the problem. As we've talked about on this channel, Russian military formations take massive casualties. And once mobilized, almost no Russian soldiers are able to be discharged from their contract effectively. And so this all means that of the minority of Russian soldiers that actually make it through the war unscathed, hardly any are going to be in a state where they want to serve in the Russian government. But how exactly do you have these heroes of the front come back and take these positions if most of them never get discharged in the first place? Well, the answer is the Kascad Brigade. This is according to one analyst, quote, enlistment with Kascad allows Russian elite figures to sidestep statutory Russian military service requirements with guaranteed safety and potentially gain favor with the Kremlin, right? This includes 270 pro-Kremlin regional lawmakers, sort of like think state representatives, and 200 members of the youth wing of the United Russia Party have served in various capacities in the Russian army in Ukraine. And at least 6 members of parliament and dozens of pro-Kremlin youth activists, right, i.e. the party's young person wing, and at least 1 cosmonaut have served in the Kascad. And this is important because while Russia has repeatedly downplayed the casualties in this conflict, it's worth noting that it would be embarrassing if a member of the Russian parliament were to be killed in this war. Again, imagine if a U.S. representative who was in the, Army or Marine Corps Reserve were to be killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. It would be a huge blow, a tremendous humiliation to the United States. And as such, right, there is an incentive for Russia. Russia wants there to be a unit where these guys can serve safely. And of course, the children of these elites want to be able to advance in the Russian government while not actually having to risk anything. But what does this look like in terms of day-to-day life? Well, it's interesting. There's not a lot of info on here, but it points out that Kascad is a drone unit. It says it has 54 crews operating 10 types of reconnaissance and combat drones along the front lines. But this is where things I think are kind of interesting. Obviously, like every good unit in this war, there's tons of social media content showing these guys with sunglasses and their rifles and their body armor near destroyed buildings and rubble. But the question is, are they actually near the front lines? Are they actually in a dangerous unit? Well, the answer is no. Now, stints with Kascad, as they point out, tend to be short-term. It's seeming, according to this reporting, to average just about 6 months or so. This is in contrast to the average Russian enlistment, which is really seems to be extending beyond a year. Many individuals who are conscripted or are sign a contract end up being forcibly extended basically for years and years at a time. It's not uncommon for soldiers to basically serve until they are KIA. Now, this I thought was more interesting. Here is a article from France 24 talking about Kascad, or Cascade as it translates to. It points out that these guys are what they describe as a safe and comfortable distance from the front, right? And again, they're sort of like mocking, like, oh, they're well-groomed and well-equipped fighters. That's not the end of the world. Those are slick haircuts. But what I think is more interesting is, of course, some of these soldiers. Let's see if we can actually find some of the clips. Actually, I can't show you on YouTube, but I was able to review clips of the Cascade unit's operations. And essentially, what they seem to be primarily deploying are the fixed-wing Russian reconnaissance aircraft. And as we've seen, these fixed-wing reconnaissance aircraft have a very long range. Sometimes it appears to be over 20 kilometers. And so when you have units that are that deep, let me try to give you an equivalent, a rough equivalent here. So if we were to look at, for example, the fighting near Crematorsk, let's see, I think it's up around here, Sloviansk, Drivka. Here we go. Kramatorsk should be right around here somewhere. It's near Toretsk. Toretsk is right here. Konstantinivka. Here we go. Here's Krematorsk. So Krematorsk is a relatively safe civilian area, and it is at most 20 kilometers from the front line. I would say that's actually about average. If we're looking at a Russian reconnaissance fixed wing unit, they're probably launching it from, I would say, comfortably outside the military zone. And so what you have instead, and if you're talking about individuals operating these drones from a bunker, again, you can definitely operate from a very safe distance from the front lines. I would say probably you're looking at least 15 kilometers from the front. This is extremely safe, extremely comfortable. These guys are not, again, if you, to use again an example of where I was in November, when you're looking at, for example, the front lines in Toretsk, you could see that, yeah, you're looking at a very safe region. This is before I think we even put on our body armor. So I would say that this is not really an area where the risk is that high. And this is, now, here's the thing, what I think is pretty funny, is that on one hand, you got to mock these people for kind of cosplaying as soldiers, getting these short deployments, coming back, high-fiving each other, being like, well, I did my part, now I can serve in the Russian government. But on the other hand, right, it's a little bit of a strange dichotomy, because the children of these elite, or these Russian elites, I guess they could presumably not serve in the Russian government at all. They could simply not join the special military operation whatsoever. And somebody has to run these deep reconnaissance drones. So it's not nothing. Again, it's a POG assignment. A person other than Grunt is kind of annoying. But it is a off the front lines assignment, very safe, and meant to sort of somewhat rubber stamp it. 6 months is a very short period of time. And so this is more like a rubber stamp unit. But the fascinating thing to me anyway is that there's always this, in a country like Russia, where Putin sits above the law, there's always going to be the law that sort of exists to protect the elites, but doesn't bind them, right? It doesn't constrain their actions. And this is, I think, a classic example of that. Whereas if you are a poor Russian, right, if you are a conscript from the poorest regions signing on to, you are restrained by the law, but it offers you no protections. Look no further than the terms of the contract. We've heard from, on this channel, dozens and dozens of Russians who say, listen, my contract is up. The contract says the Russian government has to release me. But the Russian government says, listen, you don't get your day in court, right? There is no due process to challenge the government on the terms of your contract, right? It is, the government says you still serve, and therefore you're still fighting. That's it. The idea that the government can be held accountable by an individual citizen is preposterous, right? The idea that you can sue the government and obtain some kind of relief from the government's wrongdoing is non-existent in Russia, because again, the government, and particularly Putin, exists above the law. But for elites, for well-connected politicians and business owners, the law operates in a different perspective, right? The law exists simply to protect those people, to protect their assets, to protect them physically. And that means that is because they have power, and the power they hold is the leverage that allows them to extract concessions from the Russian government, right? So just like Vladimir Putin, it doesn't matter what the average Russian conscript thinks about Vladimir Putin, because he is powerless to influence that person's decisions. But if you talk about a Russian oligarch who earns billions of dollars a year in an industry, Vladimir Putin cannot afford to lose the favor of more than a handful of these guys, more than about 3 or 4, I would say. Of the, let's say there's about 100 of them, I would say he can afford to lose the favor of perhaps 10 before it becomes a real existential problem for him. And so therefore he sits there and goes, okay, well, the real powers are going to give you assurances. They say, listen, if your kid gets assigned to this unit, right, he's not going to get killed. He's not going to be in some kind of crazy fight. He's going to operate some drones. He's going to do some behind the lines work. And then in 6 months, he's going to get discharged. And then, this is the important part, the Putin and his government says, now we're going to get to bring your kid into the fold. He's going to come into the tent, into the family of made men within Russia. This is important because when you have an oligarch who you need to curry their favor, it is powerful to have leverage over a man. But a man is only so exploitable, right? But when you have leverage over their whole family, and when you have the real loyalty of their family, that is a tremendous, tremendous power to have over someone, right? And so the best way to get the loyalty of a family is to make good on those promises. And so for the Russian state, they say, listen, we can't have these guys, these young men who are the children of politicians, we can't have them getting killed. Because imagine if you are a Russian oligarch with a lot of power in your own right, and then your child is killed in a special military operation. You're going to be furious. You're going to be furious with Putin. And again, no matter how much leverage Putin has over you, killing their child will make them infuriated and uncontrollable. Whereas if you have their child as a prestigious member of a regional government or even in the national parliament, then that is a different situation. Now you have the father and the son both tremendously loyal to the regime and inside the regime, so to speak. So this unit is a thing that must exist politically. It must offer. Putin wants these guys to come in. He wants them to serve in this drone unit. He wants them to survive so that they can go and they can further, deeper link the Russian oligarchy with the Kremlin's own objectives. And while the Kremlin showers these guys with benefits as they rise in their careers, they're also going to cement their relationship and the loyalty of these oligarchs. And so it's so important that the Kremlin can control the other sources of power within its country. That means, though, of course, again, that Russians who have no power, right? The 55-year-old father from Tuva, he is going to he never had any power. He has no leverage over the Kremlin. The Kremlin is going to use him as a tool to exploit. The only thing that they have to do is make sure that the family is paid enough that they don't complain when their loved one is killed. That's it. And before we talk about a pivoting Ukrainian strategy, I wanted to mention very importantly that you guys notice I am very critical of the current White House. I was critical of the previous White House. I think both of their policies were pretty deeply flawed. However, that means that sponsors hate me, right? And YouTubers rely, most of them anyway, rely on sponsors to make ends meet. But I don't, because I have you guys. You guys are my sponsor, and I try to give back, right? So Combat Vet News is my version of Patreon. You should click the link in the description and become a member. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to uncensored combat videos and analysis, the kind that YouTube has banned me from showing you, right? YouTube won't even let me upload these videos, so I put them on Combat Vet News every Tuesday and Thursday. Plus, for lieutenant tier and colonel tier members, you get access to a weekly AMA, Ask Me Anything, and I drop those responses in a video every single Thursday. Plus, you get access to the archive of hundreds of these videos going back to the start of the war. So if you're interested, go to combatvetnews.com, sign up, and become a member, and keep me fully independent and able to speak truth, regardless of whose poor feelings get hurt. Now, this I thought was a really interesting take that's worth talking about. And that is actually coming from former Ukrainian commander, the wildly popular Valery Zaluzhny, right? He was a former head of Ukraine's armed forces up until, I think, the first part of 2024. But what he is trying to do is conducting a widespread, what is attempting to be a wide reset of public expectations over the progress of the war after 3 years. And what he talked about is the fact that Ukrainian leaders have been insistent that the country liberate all Russian-occupied lands, including Crimea. But as he points out, that is not realistic. It is not possible to happen. And I think this is actually one of those things that maybe the Trump administration gets some credit for, is saying aloud something that has been kind of a reality for a while, which is that the Russian military and the Russian war machine is unlikely to break and collapse anytime soon, right? Maybe in 2 years, maybe in another 2.5 years, maybe they'll run out of resources, or there will be some kind of political event that makes Russia rethink their operation in Ukraine. But for the time being, there's not going to be a return to the 1991 borders or even the 2022 borders. What instead Zaluzhny is talking about, I thought was a really interesting strategy. He describes it as a high-tech war of survival. He says we have to find a way to use the minimum economic means, the minimum economic resources to achieve the maximum benefit. He says, Ukraine, we can't fight another high-casualty war, years of high-casualty war, because of our demographics and our economy. Instead, what they talk about, right, and this has been in a number of different places, is that the Ukrainians are discussing the creation of what they call a drone line or a drone wall along the front line. This is essentially Ukraine saying we are going to create a one-way demilitarized zone, but it's going to have air support and cover to infantry that makes the enemy's advance unattainable without losses. Essentially, what this would be, for example, is to find a line throughout the entire region. Let's see if we can get the right, let's see if we can get some satellite maps here. Essentially saying, listen, we are going to locate the entire front line, and we are going to cut a huge swath of clear cut, a huge swath of it. So you can see a region like this would be perfect to sit there and go, listen, we are going to go from here to here up to 10 to 15 kilometers deep. And we are going to essentially remove anything that could protect infantry, that could provide cover or concealment. We are going to flatten it. We are also going to remove all people, all buildings. It is going to become completely open terrain. And then we are going to have it monitored 24/7 by an army of drones. We're going to mine the hell out of it. And essentially anyone that comes in and penetrates this line, we don't need to do friend and foe identification. They are foe. And drones, maybe even automated drones, are going to detect movement, signs of life, and they are going to just swarm any attacking forces. And that in essence, it will be Ukraine saying, listen, this is our own dead zone. There is no there's no area, there's no place for you as Russians to dig in. You can't dig into it. And we will just piece you apart because of our continual monitoring and our continued mining of this area. Even if you clear mines, our drones will just kill your mine clearers and will redeploy more mines. This is the idea, is for Ukraine to sit there. It's essentially the military equivalent of a tourniquet. Ukraine is saying, we're never going to allow you to continue to advance. We're going to stop you, even if it means we're never going to be able to save the limb down the line. And this strategy, I think, actually has immense potential, right? We've already shown that it can work in places like Kherson, where there's a large existing barrier that functions like this, right? You can see here, right? Russians have essentially no chance of making it across to Nikopol, across the Dnieper, and that's not an accident. It's because this nature has essentially created the drone wall itself, right? The natural obstacle that cannot be crossed, right? But instead, the idea would be to simply continue this as though instead of being full of water, it's full of a mine. It's full of a minefield. And again, you combine that with clear cutting all cover and continual drone observation and monitoring, and it will essentially force the Russian offensive to grind down to a halt. It's a really interesting strategy. I think one that might actually have real potential. And the interesting part is you can build the wall 1 kilometer at a time, because again, the idea is, again, just like that, the river, the Dnieper, is that you build the obstacle and then you simply secure it, and then you can build the next kilometer. So it remains to be seen how that will work, but I think it's got more potential than any other Ukrainian strategy we've heard. Anyway, thank you guys, especially our Colonel tier members like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gao, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, and Jeff Davies, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Have a good Memorial Day. Hit that subscribe button. Cheers.